Hello, welcome to our presentation, Helping Families with Children and Youth Build Resilience in the Era of COVID-19. This is part 2, Building Resilient Coping in Families. My name is Caradina Sale, and I'm a social worker at the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and I'm the clinical leader at the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York. I am joined today with Dr. Jim Rodriguez, who's a psychologist and social worker, and he's also the leader of all of our trauma-informed care efforts at CTAC and McSilver. I'm going to start with reviewing our agenda. We're going to discuss stress and resilient coping. We're going to talk a little bit about common reactions for children. We're going to focus a lot of our time on the 3 pillars of resilience. These are strategies to build resilient coping in children and youth. We're going to focus on safety, then regulation, and then connection. We'll end by discussing the importance of caregiver self-care and the strategies for promoting it. I also want to mention that along with this presentation, we're creating a handout for you with a variety of resources that we hope you will access when convenient for you that include a lot of helpful tips and tricks and a variety of resources that can help you through this difficult time. To start with, I wanted to review some common reactions in children to a crisis such as what we're experiencing in the COVID-19 crisis and some signs of distress. It's important to remember that everyone reacts differently regarding big changes in uncertain situations such as this crisis. Most initial reactions are normal to abnormal situations, so we may feel a variety of things against the backdrop of something that's so scary and unfamiliar and abnormal to us, such as this pandemic of the COVID-19 crisis. Reactions that we are, and young people in our lives, our children and our adolescents, they may be immediate, but they may also be delayed. So, some young people may be exhibiting some of these things right away, but in 2 months they may also be exhibiting it, or maybe they didn't at first and then they will. So just want to remind everyone that there is a kind of a spectrum of how we respond to scary and uncertain situations such as what we're living through. Children and youth will actually react differently depending on their developmental level, their age, and their experiences. So here are some reactions to be aware of. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. We have fears and worries, so fears about our safety of our family members. Young people may be more worried about them getting sick or people that they know getting sick, such as teachers or friends. They may have an increased fear of separation from loved ones. There may be some regression in young people, so they may be acting childlike or immature for their age. They may be regressing to previous behaviors that you haven't seen for a while, such as thumb sucking. They may act out. They may have aggression towards siblings or others. They may also be exhibiting tantrums. There may be increased activity level, so where there's a little bit more energy in young people. They may have trouble paying attention or concentrating. They may be exhibiting some withdrawal from activities that they like or withdrawing from family members. There may also be changes in sleep or eating, such as sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, or eating too much or not eating enough. There may be heightened reactions to everyday sounds and events. So things like a car horn or a loud door that may not have made you startle or be on guard may now have you on guard and startle easily for young people. I want to reference this spiral that Jim talked about in part 1, and to remind everyone that this coronavirus pandemic is a stressful situation for many families and for everyone with each family, which means that all family members can have their fight, flight, or freeze response triggered. What can happen is that parental or caregiver stress can lead to greater child or adolescent stress, and that combination then often leads to family stress. This can lead to intolerable chronic stress or toxic stress, as mentioned in part 1. What's important here is that resilience-building responses can interfere with this spiral, and so that's the focus today. I'm going to pass it on to Jim so that he can talk about wise mind.
Yeah, so one of the things that prevents or minimizes that spiraling that Kara just talked about is the development of wise mind. So what is wise mind? Wise mind is a concept developed by psychotherapist Marsha Linehan, and she basically talks about wise mind being where our logical mind, where facts and information are processed and stored, come together with our emotional mind, where hot, strong emotions are, where we react without thinking, and often facts are distorted. And again, wise mind is that place where the logical mind and the emotional mind meet, so that we're able to process our emotions with reason, balance the information that we have that can be very scary with being able to control our emotions and being aware of our emotions, and try to keep them under control so we don't get overwhelmed by them. And oftentimes the solutions that come out of wise mind can last a lot longer because they're more realistic. They help to balance those two areas. And so the development of wise mind can be achieved through many of the resilient coping responses that we're going to be talking about in this presentation, and also the resilient messaging that we talked about in part one. So when we think about resilient coping and the development of resilience, in the context of crisis or adversity or trauma, we talk about three pillars that are critically important: safety, regulation, and connection. And we're going to go through each of these one at a time. But safety, we're going to talk about the importance of routines and schedules so that people know what to expect. In part one, we talked about safety with regards to talking to children about the things that they need to do to maintain healthy habits. In this part, we're going to be talking about some of the other aspects of safety, like routines and scheduling. Regulation, emotional regulation, controlling our emotions, as I mentioned just a while ago with wise mind, and regulating our thoughts. And then, and so engaging in self-soothing activities, pleasurable activities, and relaxation activities. And then connection. Critically, during this period, it's important to try to minimize social isolation. And so how do we stay connected with others becomes an important objective in achieving resilient coping. I'm going to turn it back to Kara now to talk about safety.
Thanks, Jim. I want to talk with you now about safety, and I want to start by talking about the importance of safety, because when there are major changes in our families and the world around us, it's important to remind children and young people that they are safe. Safety means we foster a sense of control for our families. We do this by offering guidance on what child or children can do to prevent infection, and this offers them a greater sense of control, which reduces anxiety. We also help them, we support children and youth to feel safe with trusted adults. And regardless of their age, children and youth do need to be reminded of this. So we may take it for granted that they know that they're safe and they're okay, but it's our job to remind young people that they are safe and we're in this together and we're going to get through it okay, even if there's difficulty along the way. We can help remind them of this with the focus on everyday routines and schedules along with helpful information. So there's a lot of talk, for example, about social distancing, or what we like to call is distant socializing. And this is an important part of safety, right? Because this is something that we can do. We can control how close we are interacting with people to really what we're calling flattening the curve. So we recommend that families follow the guidelines of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, which includes this social distancing or distant socializing. And it means staying away from others until the risk of contracting COVID-19 is under control. So that's what we're all participating in right now, which was also mentioned in part one. So this brings us to routines. So we have new routines and we have old routines. And at this time, you're probably establishing new routines, I'm sure you know this is a few weeks in, so you may have already done that. This is an opportunity to think about them a little more in a critical way and what could be helpful or things that you can do to change, or maybe it's already going well for you. So the routines and schedules really provide consistency and stability. They're critically important for everyone, but especially children and youth. Routines provide a sense of safety and comfort, and they help people have some sense of what to expect and what they can count on in very stressful and unstable times. So this includes daily schedules, and letting children help create their schedules can be an important way for them to participate and have some sort of control. Working with children and youth to set new routines, again, when to get schoolwork done or studied, taking breaks, exercising or relaxation, helping with chores, check-in time or worry time. That can be an important part of routine these days. For adolescents, news time perhaps, and just having an opportunity to have conversation about what's going on with everybody in their internal world, right? Finding time for privacy as well. So, and even in small spaces, if people can find a little space of their own for privacy. This helps them, we all process at different speeds. There's a lot to process these days, and so having privacy can help with that. It can also help us stick to our routines when we need. And then other routines such as bedtime, our meals, our family time are important to focus on as well during this time. And then I want to talk about planning routines. So there are a variety of ways that you can go about planning routines and managing behavior. So these are just some thoughts. So one thing that can be helpful is to list all activities that are part of your routine. So you can list them all down. You can list them all down as a family, or you can do it as caregivers and share with your kids. And then you can identify blocks of times to fill. For example, you can have schoolwork from 12 to 3 and family time from 6 to 8, or whatever makes the most sense. But this schedule and this routine is what's important, right? That you can focus on giving children and youth responsibilities. So they probably already had some responsibilities, and maybe they were going well. And now's a time where you can refocus on some of those or maybe include other responsibilities. And there's a lot going on in our households, and it does take our entire home and family to participate in the healthy functioning of our family, right? And one thing that can be really helpful is giving children and youth choices. I mentioned giving them control earlier, and one way to give young people control is also to give them choices. So you can either clean the dishes out of the sink, or you can run the sweeper. What do you prefer? And so giving choices really helps us to ensure that they'll get done. Making sure the rules are clear. So we all have rules. We know our kids have rules, and but sometimes we may not realize that they're not as clear as they can be. That's, I'm speaking to you as a caregiver of two teenagers right now, actually, and it's given me a lot of time to reflect on how much I can do to enhance responsibilities as well as making sure that my rules are clear. So, for example, if you don't finish your homework or your schoolwork online, you're not going to get screen time, and making sure that you set that rule and you stick to it can be really helpful. And then including time with each other in your routine so that it's actually built into your day-to-day routine can be really helpful, because you may think, well, we should talk or we should gather or what have you, but if it's not in your routine, it's going to become more difficult. But this is an opportunity to really build relationships with each other. And then again, remember social distancing or distance socializing, as we mentioned. Another part of what we're doing right now in our homes is promoting children's learning. So we want to keep children engaged in their work, which can be a challenge, but some ways to do this is to stay in touch with your child's school. The school is an amazing resource. Most teachers or all teachers are still working and employed to really support children through these times, providing them with assignments online, providing them with opportunity to connect with their teachers. So promoting children's learning through that, it can be incredibly helpful. It's also helpful to spend time to review their work to keep them on track and have them teach you what they've learned. So have a time in your schedule where you check in about what did you learn today? What did your teacher help you learn? And then if necessary, there are other online sites. For example, Khan Academy is a fantastic resource. This is going to be in, again, our resources at the end of the presentation. And then include routines for learning at home, and consider the need to really adjust anything for your child's age. So if there's any kind of regression happening, you may need to start to adjust time that they're on a screen and participating in online learning, or you may need to make other adjustments. And then finally, look for ways to make learning fun. This is a difficult situation, so any opportunity we can to have fun is really important, and that's why we want to talk about pleasurable activity planning, so that you have an opportunity to think about family time activities that can really help build everyone's resilience. And that includes, these are just some examples. You may have your own that work better, and we highly encourage that as well. So these are just some examples around movie night, game night, religious activities, for example, prayer and events on the internet. I know a lot of families are participating in online services, and cooking and baking. There's also age-appropriate child youth activities, reading, watching TV, listening to music, video games, and then contacting friends via social media can be really helpful, as well as volunteering. So there are many organizations that are offering volunteering opportunities. That is one way to build resilience, is when we can reach out and support others. And they found organizations have found ways for people to do this online or to figure out how to be socially distant when doing that. And then changing your scenery. We highly recommend changing your scenery when things get a little challenging. So if you can get outside for a few minutes a day, that can be helpful in any way you can to change your scenery. Healthy eating and exercise is an important part of our routines. So healthy eating, for example, staying hydrated with water, following the MyPlate, that's the USDA guidelines around healthy eating, and there will be resources around that. And then monitoring sugar intake. For exercising, walks, chair exercising, online virtual exercise classes for young people, free workouts, free yoga, anything that can really help to promote movement and exercise. And then we just want to focus on keeping it developmental. So for preschool children, allow short-term changes to sleeping arrangements. So you may have young people sleeping with you when they have their own bed, and this is okay. This is their way of reaching out for comfort and for connection and for security. You can try online storytelling or activities together. For school-age children, again, assigning household chores. You know, that may not be appropriate for preschool children, but for school-age children, it absolutely is. Maintaining or promoting healthy habits or health promotion, again, hydrating or hand cleaning. And then for adolescents, engaging in chores, supporting younger siblings. Starting strategies to promote healthy lifestyles. So adolescents can also start promoting a healthy lifestyle. So that takes us to regulation, which is incredibly important and one of those pillars. And I want to talk about the importance of self-regulation. Self-regulation is the ability to manage and understand our reactions and our behaviors. It's important for development as it helps children with connection, social skills, learning, managing stress, and processing information. So when we're dysregulated, we can't manage our stress and we can't process information. Self-regulation develops most in our early years, but continues to develop into adulthood. And self-regulation is developed through talking about feelings and role modeling. There's also co-regulation, which involves regulating with a trusted person. So it's regulation, self-regulation in relationship. It can be helpful to regulate oneself by co-regulating. But sometimes we need each other in order to regulate. And developing self-regulation and co-regulation helps to improve our ability to respond to the appropriate information within our environment, which is incredibly important right now. Some of these activities include self-soothing activities, which is breathing for children and for teens and adults, yoga, meditation, or mindfulness for teens, progressive muscle relaxation, and again, all of these will be a part of our resources. Engaging the senses is also incredibly helpful and helps with regulation. So while our day-to-day routines have changed pretty dramatically, engaging our senses is a wonderful way to regulate. Our 5 senses include sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And here are some great reminders on how to engage our senses, as well as movement. So we don't want to forget movement. Movement can help us to engage a variety of our senses, including hearing, sight, and even touch, and can be very helpful regarding regulation. And coping thoughts. So another way that we can regulate is to consider our thoughts and consider what we can and can't control. So this is a really helpful diagram that we created for you all to think about. You know, I can't control. So in the outer layer is what I can't control, and inside is what I can control. So I can't control the virus. I can't control the cure. I can't control others getting sick. But I can control myself, right? I can't control other people's behaviors, but I can control my behavior. I can't control what other people think or feel, but I can control my own feelings and thoughts. So thinking about what we can and can't control is incredibly helpful when we're stressed and distressed. And then keeping it developmental, again, encouraging expression through play and storytelling for young people, planning calming or comforting activities before bedtime, or giving extra support at bedtime. That's actually where you may see some of those behaviors come up for young children, is around bedtime. So just being aware of that. You may need to provide some extra support. For school-age children, regular exercise and stretching can be really helpful, engaging in educational activities. And in adolescents, encouraging discussion about COVID-19, that can be really helpful, but you also don't want to force it. So just there is a balance there. And then focusing on what you can and can't control. So I'm going to pass it over to Jim, who's going to talk about connection and take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Kara. We already talked about the importance of connection earlier, the importance to connect with others in our family and in our communities. And the other thing that we include in here is caregiver self-care. Connecting to ourselves as parents and caregivers is critically important. So when we talk about connections and why they're important, first, it's important to understand that nurturing connections with others, whether it's done person to person, or face-to-face, or via distance, can be incredibly helpful in regulating ourselves, in decreasing our stress levels and anxiety when we are doing it with people who we have strong connections and relationships with. So connections are important in many ways to help decrease stress and anxiety as well, as long as those connections are with people who, again, we have nurturing, strong, positive relationships with. But social connections are also important to reduce social isolation. In the COVID-19 era, everyone is isolated inside with stay-at-home orders. Isolation can lead to depression for many people who've never experienced depression before. And also, people who have depression are at greater risk for worsening symptoms if they remain isolated. So it's important to maintain those connections. Isolation can also lead to an increase in worries. When we're alone and by ourselves, we're left to ruminate in our own minds and think about all the things that we're worried about. So for all these reasons, connections are important. Connections allow us to communicate with others, just hear others. It allows us to get out of our own minds, as we often talk about. It's helpful to share the burden, talk about our difficulties and our challenges during these times. And also important to hear how others are coping with the situation. Maybe others have developed different ways of coping. Listening to what they've done can be helpful to us. It's also an opportunity to support and comfort others. So when our friends and our family are having difficulties, sometimes we can provide support, and providing that support can be helpful to us. It's opportunities for breaks and enjoyment, just to sit back and try to have a laugh or joke about what's happening, either COVID-19 related or not. Is important at this time. And then it's important to increase our sense of hope for the future. Again, when we're feeling better about ourselves and our relationships with others, we can have a better sense that things will get better in the long run. And then moving on to connecting with others. So again, as Kara has mentioned, we have many resources available. So many of these suggestions we're going to be making for connecting to others virtually or via the internet are in that resource page that we're going to make available to you. But we encourage you to make contacts with trusted friends through virtual hangouts, Zoom, Google Hangouts, House Party, and of course the good old-fashioned phone contact. These are all ways in which you can maintain contacts with each other by talking to folks, and also by face-to-face contact. Kara talked a lot earlier about family activities and family time to connect with others as you go along. So what's really helpful here as well is those connections to others create space for your children to deal and cope better with the situation, but also hopefully for you as well. You should find enjoyment in those activities. And then there's sites for engaging in virtual play activities, virtual play dates, again, using some of the platforms we've already talked about, like Zoom and House Party. There are gaming sites that are available. There are sites like Netflix Party, which allow you to watch movies together. And then there are online communities that folks can join with each other. Reddit and other platforms allow people to develop online communities. I would give a word of caution when you're encouraging young people to join online communities, to make sure that you're aware of what that what is being said on those communities and who's on those communities to ensure safety and that they're not being preyed upon or bullied. And then, of course, other things that are happening right now that are very helpful: online places of worship. So places of worship are providing opportunities for folks to worship and get community online as well. There's also online support groups that are available that we'll list in our resource guide. And then places of positivity that you can go online, places where you can see demonstrations of people helping each other, of people coming together, and other kinds of ways that you can relax, COVID-19 related, and also distract yourself, where you can go to get positive messages and positive stimulus. So, and then as we've talked about, keeping it developmental for preschool children, spending more time connecting with your young children who are more anxious and scared during this time is important. They may need your support, as Kara mentioned earlier. That can even include, when it's appropriate and necessary, changing sleeping arrangements. For school-age children, maintaining contact with friends and encouraging them to do so through the telephone or social media. Again, be aware of what they're hearing and listening to prevent bullying that may occur or any exposure to stigma or discrimination occurring or misinformation that they're getting if they're getting it online. And then for adolescents, very similar, again, helping them to maintain or encouraging to maintain those contacts and discussing whether they're getting messages that you don't agree with or that might be problematic in those online contacts. And then, as we mentioned, the last part of connections is connecting to yourself. As caregivers, it's important to take care of yourselves. When we talk about self-care for caregivers, we talk about the ABCs, the importance of awareness of your needs, awareness of your stress levels, what triggers your stress, the difficulties that you're having, and also awareness of the internal and external resources. Internal resources being, again, the ways you've coped in the past and what has helped you in the past, and external resources, friends, families, and supports that you know can be helpful in difficult times. Finding that balance between your work activities, if you continue to work at home, or your caregiving activities and your own needs. Between work and play, balancing activity with rest. And again, being focused on the needs of others, but also focused on your own needs as well. So sometimes it's important to set up boundaries with others, including young children, to let them know that there's time for mom and dad, or grandma and grandpa, or uncle and aunt to take care of themselves during these difficult times. And then connection to yourself, again, where your feelings, your own thoughts and your feelings, and something greater than yourself, feeling a greater connection to others just generally in the world, as well as your own faith beliefs and religious communities. And it is important to give some time to developing a self-care plan and thinking about what works best for you and planning accordingly. As we mentioned earlier, the importance of this is because parent or caregiver stress can lead to child and adolescent stress, which can lead to general family stress. The important part is that you as parents and caregivers are at the top of that triangle. So it's important for you to take care of others, even though it may sound cliche. In order to be able to take care of others, you need to take care of yourself. So with that in mind, some ideas about protecting your physical and mental health. Again, as we talked about earlier, it's important in your families to think about routines and schedules. The same for yourself. Maintain your old routines as much as possible and develop new ones that work for you in the various roles you may be playing. Disconnect and reconnect. Again, there's a lot of information about there. You as parents and caregivers must be aware of what's going on to keep yourselves and your children safe. So getting enough information so that you know what you need to be doing at the time is critically important, but also disconnecting from that and connecting with friends and families and supports is critically important. So as Kara mentioned earlier, scheduling time to get your updates about what's going on from the media or from whatever other source. And some of the very basic recommendations we often exercise daily. Many of the sites that are on our resource list will also talk about ways that you can take walks with social distancing, walking upstairs or downstairs in your apartment buildings if that's where you live, chair exercises if you're indoors all the time. These are all ways that you can exercise and try to keep yourselves active through these difficult times. Eating well, limiting sugar intake, staying hydrated, and trying to avoid nervous eating. These are all some of the ways in which, again, when we're cooped up in the house, we can slowly begin to develop bad habits with regards to eating, trying to, again, be mindful of your eating habits. And then getting enough sleep. Sleep hygiene is probably one of the areas that's most important for all of us. We often don't think enough about it. It's important to make your nighttime sleep count more. Although it's often difficult, it's also perfectly appropriate to take naps during the day. Brief naps can oftentimes be reinvigorating and help. And then in the nighttime, it's important to have routines. Some of the basic ones, you know what works well for you, but some of the basic points that we often make with regards to sleep hygiene is, avoiding electronics, the use of computers and TVs and smartphones before bed. Eating or drinking sugary drinks before bed or going to sleep, or having high-fat or high-carbohydrate foods before going to bed. All these things can interfere with sleeping habits. And then some other activities that can help in winding down and preparing to go to sleep include taking a warm shower. Sometimes a very brief cardio workout before you go to sleep can be helpful. Listening to relaxing music can help calm down and get you ready for your sleep routine. It's an important point to make. Be mindful of your alcohol intake and substance use. They don't ever reduce your stress and often worsen it. And oftentimes difficult times like this and crises like this can lead to increases in using substances or relying on substances to reduce stress. And then practicing relaxation exercise. Kara mentioned many of the ones that you can have your children engage in, like yoga and meditation, progressive muscle relaxation. All of those same exercises can be helpful to adults as well, or are helpful to adults as well, I should say. And be clear about this. In our resource guide, we have some appropriate ones that are good for adult caregivers. And mindfulness activities as well, being mindful. Going back to wise mind, being mindful often means being aware of those feelings that you're having and being aware that you might be getting overwhelmed by them, and then putting into practice many of the strategies and resources that we've laid out to you to help reduce that. And this is just a helpful way of thinking about the many coping strategies that you do. Again, you have to identify what works for you. This is just a list and a way of thinking about different ways of coping. So we try to use the term, and this comes from dialectical behavior therapy, accepts, the acronym accepts. So you can include activities to distract yourself, whether that's listening to music or other ways in which watching movies, watching shows, watching your favorite YouTube videos, whatever you can do to distract yourself. That could also mean things like cooking or doing chores or taking care of household projects that you've been putting off. Kara talked earlier again about volunteering. Contributing to others can be helpful also. Feeling that you're making a change in the world can help to build resilience. Comparisons. Again, we don't want to look at those as less fortunate or compare ourselves always to folks that are less fortunate, but in times like this, it is always important to remind yourself that you are in a better place than many others who are going through some incredible difficulties. And even if you are going through your own difficulties, the loss of a loved one, oftentimes thinking about those things that might make you feel fortunate can be helpful. Emotions are critically important. One of the areas that's really important to understand is that you want to try to avoid feeling guilty. What can happen when there's a crisis and we have stress and anxiety in our lives is we can react in ways that we're not accustomed to. Maybe we get overwhelmed, maybe we're more irritable than we normally are, or lash out or respond harshly to other people when we're not normally doing that. And then guilt sets in, and we begin to beat ourselves up for responding in ways. So when we talk about avoiding guilt, that's what we're trying to refer to, is that there's this tendency to, in difficult times, take a lot of responsibility for trying to do everything exactly the right way. So you can change your emotions. Sometimes if you find yourself sort of spiraling into intense negative feelings, trying to watch funny videos, changing your emotions, doing whatever you can to feel better about things, again, whether that's distracting yourself or engaging in distracting activities, or engaging in fun activities when you're feeling down, trying to find things that make you happy when you're feeling upset, are some strategies that you can use. Pushing away the stressful situation. As Kara mentioned earlier, this is for children, but for adults as well. Scheduling time to worry. Scheduling time to look at the media and review what's going on, but then all the rest of the time trying to push away the stress of the situation and engage in other activities that keep you healthy and stress-free. And then we talked about replacing thoughts. Some thoughts that can be helpful in these times are, this too shall pass. Many people may be going through intense difficulties right now and experiencing really negative things, but we will get through this. And when you think about the ways you've coped in the past, focus on those and focused on the ways that you've dealt with difficult situations in the past. In addition to that, things like taking it one day at a time and taking one moment at a time can be thoughts that you can use to replace maybe negative thoughts or thoughts that are increasing your anxiety, depression, anger, whatever you may be going through. And then intensify other sensations. So when you're trying to control your body, sometimes you may feel out of control. Intensifying other sensations can help. Putting cold water on your face, eating ice. These are ways in which you kind of can disrupt the cycle that leads to further and further difficulties with coping through stress. And then with all of this, I know we've talked and thrown a lot of strategies and suggestions at you, but what we do hope is that you can find in these what works for you. There's certainly what works for one person does not work for another, so many of the suggestions we made are kind of broad, and some are very specific, but they may not always work for you. You need to find what works for you. Be mindful of the things that and the signs that you might be getting overwhelmed by stress, things like increasing headaches or not having a lot of energy, having problems with your stomach or gastrointestinal problems. Aches, pains, intense muscles, insomnia, all of these are signs. If you find yourself having difficulty coping despite the strategies or attempts at using the strategies we've talked about, try to find support. There's the SAMHSA Disaster Distress Hotline will help you or can help you connect to services out there in the community. And also we want to be mindful of those folks who might be victims of violence in the home. These times, because folks are cooped in, can lead to greater exposure to domestic violence in the home. We're offering here and providing here a hotline, a nationwide hotline that folks can turn to if they feel like they are unsafe in the home and need support. So in summary, again, crisis is stressful, but it can provide an opportunity to teach coping strategies and to develop new ways of coping with difficult situations. We hope that some of the recommendations we made during this presentation will be new and helpful to you through these difficult times. We tried to discuss one way of kind of simplifying the recommendations we've made is to always think about what helps to keep you safety, what helps to regulate your emotions, and what helps to maintain connections with others. So those three areas are the main things that you want to focus on through this crisis situation, and to develop better, healthy habits and to prevent the worsening of problems. And it does involve proper planning. So thinking about the strategies that we've talked about, finding what works for you, and putting it into a plan and routines for self-care can be helpful. It does take some time to sort of plan and lay out some of the things that work for you. And then you can use the suggestions made in this presentation, but make sure that it works for you. You know yourself and your children best. With that, we want to thank you, Kara, on behalf of Kara D. Nasael and myself. We want to thank you for joining this webinar, seeing and viewing this webinar. Visit the CTAC at www.ctacny.org to view past offerings and trainings, or sign up for updates and event announcements, and to access resources, including COVID-19 related resources for mental health providers. And if you have any questions, please send your questions or feedback to ctac.info@nyu.edu.